Perhaps by now you are asking yourself, we have learned many things around regionalization. Could you please make a succinct, easy to remember and communicate what the regionalization will and will not do?
The legislation passed at General Conference addressed the following. 1. It renames and realigns the existing central conferences as regional conferences, so there is parity in naming and the elimination of a label, central, that reminds all too much of the previous history of a segregated central jurisdiction in the United States. The result will be 8 regional conferences, the existing renamed central conferences, and the United States. 2, it creates a regional conference for the United States with powers parallel to that of the other regional conferences worldwide. 3, it makes room for the possibility of jurisdictional conferences within regional conferences outside the United States. 4, it provides greater clarity about the power these regional conferences have to customize the denomination's book of discipline as adopted by the General Conference for the sake of mission and ministry in their own areas. What are regional conferences? More than simply a new name for central conferences, regional conferences would have more explicit and clearly defined powers than their predecessors. Since one of the regions would be the United States, United Methodists here would have, for the first time, authority to adapt the discipline in the same ways that every other regional conference would be able to do. Regional conferences without jurisdictions would elect and assign the bishops for their episcopal areas. Regional conferences with jurisdictions would set the boundaries for the jurisdictions within them. The jurisdictions, in turn, would elect and assign the bishops to serve within the jurisdictional areas.
How would persons be elected to regional conference? Election to be a delegate to a regional conference would not change from how elections to existing bodies, general, central, and jurisdictional conferences happen now. For the United States and other regional conferences that may in the future create jurisdictions within them, those elected as general conference delegates and those elected as jurisdictional conference delegates would serve as the regional conference delegates. For regional conferences without jurisdictions, those elected as general conference delegates and those elected as regional conference delegates would serve as regional conference delegates. Also, in continuity with current patterns, general conference delegates would have voice and vote at the general conference, with the jurisdictional/regional conference delegates acting as reserve delegates in order of election should one or more of the general conference delegates be unable to serve on a temporary basis or at all. Then at the regional conference, both those elected to the general conference and those elected to the jurisdictional/regional conference would serve as delegates to the regional conference. At the level of jurisdictional conferences, where these exist, the general conference delegates from within that jurisdiction, the jurisdictional conference delegates within that jurisdiction would have voice and vote on matters relating to the work of the jurisdiction, including the election of bishops.
Who could approve adaptations to the discipline? Only the regional conferences, not the jurisdictional conferences or annual conferences within them, would have the authority to authorize adaptation of the discipline for their regions. Regional conferences could also authorize annual conferences to propose but not make further adaptations. Annual conferences would bring their proposed adaptations to the regional conference for final action. What could regional conferences customize? The legislation grants new specific authorization to regional conferences to take full responsibility for setting the following standards as part of its own regional book of discipline. 1. Criteria for ordained and licensed ministry. 2. Criteria for specialized lay ministries. 3. Criteria for admission of and care for lay members. 4. Organization of the regional, annual, district, and charge conferences. 5. Hymnal and ritual. And 6. Judicial administration.
What does the legislation not do? While the legislation proposed goes a long way toward establishing a more sweeping and church-wide role for regional conferences, it does not entirely fulfill the promise of paragraph 101 as originally adopted in 2012. Paragraph 101 calls for a reorganized general book of discipline that applies worldwide. It contains 7 parts. The first 5 parts have been in place for a long time and are not revisable by regional conferences. They are as follows: Constitution, General Book of Discipline, Doctrinal Standards and Our Theological Task, the Ministry of All Christians, Social Principles, Preface and Preamble. The existing Part 6, which comprises the rest of the current Book of Discipline, will be reorganized into a new Part 6 and a new Part 7. The new Part 6 would include all other matters that cannot be adapted by regional conferences. The new Part 7 would include all matters that could be adapted by the regional conferences.
What can you see as a blessing and as a possible challenge for the denomination? What do you think about the fact that no central conference or regional conference has or would not have the power to change the core of our identity as United Methodists? The Constitution, paragraph 101 itself, the doctrinal standards, and our theological task, the ministry of all Christians, and the social principles. 1. Criteria for ordained and licensed ministry. Regional conferences would set the minimum qualifications and educational requirements to ordain, commission, and license clergy within their bounds. And your conference with each regional conference could include additional qualifications and educational requirements as well. 2. Criteria for specialized lay ministries. Regional conferences would also set the minimum qualifications and educational requirements for specialized lay ministries within their bounds. 3. Criteria for admission of and care for lay members. Regional conferences could set their own criteria to determine whether persons qualify for professing membership in the United Methodist Church within their bounds, as well as set expected standards for character and conduct for persons to be continued as professing members. 4. Organization of the regional annual district and church conferences. Regional conferences could create their own forms of organization for these bodies within the region and document them within their regional book of discipline. All such forms of organization must comply with the laws of the country or countries involved. Hymnal and ritual. Each regional conference could develop and publish its own hymnal and ritual, including its own rites for marriage and burial for use within their bounds. 6. Judicial administration. Each regional conference would establish its own judicial court to rule upon questions arising from the new or adapted sections of the regional discipline over time. It will also set its own rules and processes to implement its rules for the investigation and, if needed, trial of its clergy and laity when formal complaints are brought based on the chargeable offenses and penalties as adopted in its regional book of discipline.